After a heated argument, my husband pushed me down the stairs. Badly injured and unconscious, my 8-year-old son bravely called for help. At the hospital, my husband stormed in, grabbed my arm, and, in a fit of rage, punched my injury. The pain was unbearable, but what happened next was truly shocking. I used to believe in fairy tales. The idea that love could be enough, that the right person could make life beautiful, that once you found them, everything would fall into place. That was the dream I held on to when I met Ryan. He was everything I thought I wanted: confident, charming, attentive. He knew how to make me feel special, how to say the right things at the right time. I was drawn to him like a moth to a flame, completely unaware that the warmth I felt in the beginning would one day turn into something that would burn me alive. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. I was grading papers back when I was still a teacher, and he sat at the table next to me. He struck up a conversation, effortlessly weaving his way into my world. I remember how he made me laugh, how he told me he admired my dedication to shaping young minds. Within weeks, we were inseparable. He made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. A year later, we were married. I left my job to support Ryan's dream, his own business, something he swore would provide us with a better future. He convinced me that it made sense for me to focus on our home, on the family we would build together. I believed him. I trusted that he wanted the best for us. In the beginning, it even felt right. I loved making our house a home, preparing meals for us, and imagining the life we were going to create. Then, slowly, things began to change. At first, it was subtle, little comments that made me doubt myself. "You didn't clean properly today," or "What do you even do all day?" They weren't cruel, not yet, but they planted tiny seeds of doubt in my mind. I started questioning myself, wondering if I really was doing enough. I worked harder, keeping the house spotless, making sure dinner was always ready on time, avoiding anything that might upset him. Then Noah was born, and for a while, things got better. Holding my baby boy in my arms gave me a sense of purpose I had never felt before. I poured all my love into him, determined to be the best mother I could be. Ryan seemed happy, too, at least in the beginning. But then, the stress of his business failures began to weigh on him, and suddenly, I became his punching bag, not physically, not yet, but emotionally, mentally. His words cut deeper than any wound ever could. "You're lucky I put up with you. If it weren't for me, you'd have nothing. You're a terrible wife. Useless." At first, I tried to fight back. I told him how much I was doing, how hard I worked to keep everything running smoothly. But he always had an answer. He made me feel small, worthless, like I was failing at the only thing I was supposed to be good at, being his wife and Noah's mother. And then came the anger, the outbursts. He started snapping at Noah, too. My sweet, innocent boy, who only wanted his father's love. Ryan would scold him over the smallest things, leaving his toys out, talking too loudly, asking too many questions. I did my best to shield Noah, to step in before Ryan's temper flared, but it only made things worse. "Stop babying him, Lily," Ryan would sneer. "Maybe if you disciplined him properly, I wouldn't have to step in." It didn't matter what I said. Ryan always had an excuse. It was always my fault. I told myself I could handle it, that if I just tried harder, if I was a better wife, things would get better. But the truth was, Ryan didn't want a wife. He wanted a servant, someone to control. Then, everything changed one night. The night I finally saw him for what he really was. It had been a long day. Noah had been sick, and I had barely slept the night before. I was exhausted, running on fumes, but I still made dinner, still made sure the house was in order before Ryan got home. But when he walked in, he was already in a bad mood. Another failed business deal, another excuse to take his frustration out on me. I barely had time to say hello before he started. "Why is dinner late?" he snapped. "It's not," I said softly, trying to keep the peace. "It's right here." "Don't talk back to me, Lily," he warned, his eyes dark with something I had learned to fear. Noah was sitting at the table, watching everything with wide eyes. I forced a smile and said, "Let's just eat, okay?" But Ryan wasn't interested in dinner. He wanted to fight. You don't do anything all day, and you can't even have dinner ready on time? He spat. I wanted to tell him how I had been taking care of our sick child, how I had been running on no sleep, how I had done everything I could to keep things together, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Nothing I said would ever be enough. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. I asked you a question, he growled. Noah let out a small, scared whimper. My heart clenched. I couldn't let him see this. Ryan, please, I whispered. Not in front of Noah. That was the wrong thing to say. His eyes flashed with rage. The next thing I knew, I was falling. My feet slipped, and suddenly, I was tumbling down the stairs. I don't remember the moment I hit the ground. Only the sharp pain that shot through my body, the sound of Noah screaming, and then darkness. When I woke up, everything hurt. My head was pounding, my arm felt like it was on fire, and the bright lights of the hospital room made it hard to focus. My mother's face was the first thing I saw. She was sitting by my bedside, her eyes red from crying. Mom, I croaked, my voice weak. She took my hand, squeezing it gently. You're safe, sweetheart. You're safe now. But I wasn't, because Ryan hadn't been arrested. He hadn't been punished. And I knew, as long as he was free, I would never truly be safe. I wanted to believe it was an accident, that maybe I had just lost my balance, that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But deep down, I knew the truth. Ryan had pushed me, and that meant it would only get worse. The pain in my arm was unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. I had spent years making excuses for Ryan, convincing myself that his anger wasn't really his fault, that he was just stressed, that he would change. But lying in that hospital bed, staring at the bruises on my arms, I finally saw the truth. I was trapped in a cycle that would never end unless I did something about it.
Noah.
I needed to get out for him. I couldn't let my son grow up thinking this was normal. That love was supposed to hurt. That a father was supposed to make his family afraid. My parents had been there when I woke up, their faces filled with worry. My mother kept brushing my hair back, whispering, "You're safe, sweetheart." But I wasn't safe. Not yet. Ryan didn't show up for 2 days. 2 whole days without a single phone call, a single message. And then, just when I started to believe he might not come at all, he walked in. I should have expected his reaction. The moment he stepped into the room, his face twisted in annoyance, not concern. He didn't rush to my side. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just stood there, shaking his head like I had inconvenienced him. "Are you done with this drama now?" he said, his voice low but sharp. I blinked at him, my throat dry. "What?" "You heard me." He stepped closer, his eyes dark. "You're lying here, making a big deal out of nothing, while I'm the one left dealing with everything at home." Everything inside me froze. He didn't care. Not even a little. "Ryan, I fell down the stairs," I said, my voice shaking. He scoffed. "Yeah, and whose fault is that?" I stared at him, my body numb. Was he seriously blaming me? Did he really think I had done this to myself? "You need to get up, Lily. Let's go." "I can't just leave. I have a fractured arm, and my head." "Oh, come on." He let out a bitter laugh. "This is ridiculous. Do you have any idea how much this is costing us? I don't have money to waste on hospital bills because you can't be careful." Tears burned my eyes. I had spent years making myself small, staying quiet to avoid making him angry. But this was beyond cruel. "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan's face darkened. He stepped closer, gripping my uninjured arm. "You don't get to decide that." I sucked in a breath. He was going to drag me out of the hospital if he had to. He didn't care if I was in pain. He didn't care if I was hurt. "Let go of me," I whispered. "Lily."
Let
go." A voice cut through the tension. "Step away from her." We both turned. A nurse stood in the doorway, her face pale but firm. And next to her, a police officer. Ryan's grip loosened instantly. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, putting on that fake, charming smile he used with other people. "She's my wife." The officer didn't move. "I don't care who you are. If you don't step back right now, I will escort you out. For a moment, Ryan didn't move. His jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with anger. But then, with a deep breath, he let go of me and took a step back. "We'll talk later," he muttered before turning and walking out of the room. I felt my whole body collapse into the bed, as if I had been holding my breath this entire time. The nurse rushed to my side, checking my arm. "Are you okay?" I nodded weakly. "That man shouldn't be anywhere near you," she said softly. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. She was right. Ryan had already taken so much from me. If I let him, he would take more. My freedom, my sanity, maybe even my life. I had to stop this. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. With the help of my parents, I filed a police report. My mother held my hand the entire time as I recounted everything, every cruel word, every time he had grabbed me, every moment I had been too afraid to fight back. The officer listened carefully, taking notes. He didn't question me.
He didn't doubt me.
"You're doing the right thing," he said. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that. The next few days were a blur. My parents took Noah home with them while I stayed in the hospital for further observation. Ryan called.
And called. And called.
First, he was angry. "How dare you file a report against me?" Then he tried to play the victim. "Lily, come on. You're blowing this out of proportion." Then came the fake apologies. "I didn't mean it. You know I love you." But I didn't answer. Sophia, my lawyer, was the one who advised me to ignore him. I met her through a domestic abuse support organization my mother had contacted. She was fierce, confident, and made it clear that I had more power than I thought. "Ryan will try to manipulate you," she warned. "He'll say whatever he can to make you doubt yourself. But don't listen. You have a case against him, and I'm going to make sure he faces consequences." I wanted to believe her, but part of me still feared him. Then one evening, I received a message that made my blood run cold. It was a voicemail from Ryan. "You think you can just walk away from me?" His voice was calm, too calm. "You're going to regret this, Lily. You have no idea what you've started." I sat there, my hands shaking. This wasn't just an empty threat. This was war. And, for the first time, I was ready to fight back. I had spent years letting Ryan control me, letting him make me feel small, weak, incapable. But something inside me had shifted. Maybe it was the way he had grabbed me in that hospital room, or the way he had looked at me as if I was nothing but a problem he had to deal with. Maybe it was the way he had threatened me in that voicemail, his voice laced with quiet, simmering rage. Whatever it was, I knew one thing. I wasn't going back. Sophia told me that abusers like Ryan thrived on fear. They relied on their victims being too scared to fight back. That's why he was trying so hard to break me down with his messages, switching between threats and fake apologies, hoping I would cave in, hoping I would give up and come crawling back. But I wasn't the same woman I had been before that fall. I had woken up in that hospital bed a different person, a person who had seen just how little Ryan cared if I lived or died. I couldn't ignore his threats, though. Sophia advised me to document everything, to keep every voicemail, every message, every attempt he made to intimidate me. She was determined to make sure he faced the consequences. "We have a strong case, Lily," she said, "but we need to be prepared for the kind of games he'll play." She wasn't wrong. A week after filing the report, I received another voicemail. This time, his tone was softer. "Lily, I don't know what's happening to us," he said, his voice filled with forced sadness. "I know I've made mistakes, but can't we just talk? Can't we fix this?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of it.
Talk.
Ryan had spent years making sure my voice didn't matter, and now he wanted to talk? I didn't respond. I knew exactly what this was, just another tactic. He wanted me to let my guard down. And when I didn't answer, his next message was full of anger. "You think you can do this to me? You think you can take my son away from me? You're nothing without me, Lily. You hear me? Nothing." I forwarded every voicemail to Sophia. She assured me that this was only helping our case, proving just how dangerous Ryan really was. Still, the fear never fully left me. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted. Every time I heard footsteps outside my parents' house, I held my breath. What if he showed up? What if he found a way to hurt me again? The night I finally let myself break down, Noah was already asleep in my parents' guest room. My mother found me sitting on the couch, staring at my phone with tears running down my face. "He won't stop," I whispered. "What if he never stops?" She sat down beside me and wrapped her arms around me like she used to when I was a child. "You're not alone in this, Lily," she said softly. "We're here. Sophia is here. You are stronger than you know, sweetheart." For the first time in a long time, I let myself believe her. The court date was set. I knew Ryan would try to make himself look like the victim. That was his specialty, convincing people that he was the one who had been wronged. But I had something he didn't have, the truth. When I walked into the courtroom, my hands were trembling. I had prepared myself for this moment, but nothing could have truly prepared me for the sight of Ryan sitting there, looking as confident as ever. He was wearing his best suit, his hair neatly styled, his expression calm and controlled. It made my stomach turn. He still thought he was in control. Sophia gave me a reassuring nod as we took our seats. "Just tell the truth," she whispered. "That's all you need to do." The trial started with the prosecution laying out the case against Ryan. The nurse from the hospital testified first, describing how she had witnessed him grabbing me, how she had seen the fear in my eyes. Then the police officer who had removed him from the room took the stand, explaining how Ryan had resisted leaving and how aggressive he had been. Ryan's lawyer tried to downplay everything. "My client was simply frustrated," he argued. "He had been dealing with a difficult situation. He never meant to harm his wife." Sophia stood up then, her voice firm. "And yet, he did harm her. He verbally and physically assaulted her. We have evidence of his continued harassment, including threats made after she left him." That's when she played the voicemails. Hearing his own words echo through the silent courtroom made Ryan shift uncomfortably in his seat. His confident demeanor faltered just a little. I kept my eyes on him the whole time, watching as he clenched his jaw, as his fingers tightened into fists on the table. Then it was my turn to speak. I took a deep breath and walked to the witness stand. My hands shook as I placed them on my lap, but I didn't let the fear control me. I looked at the judge, then at Ryan, and I spoke my truth. I told them everything about the slow, creeping control, the way his words had chipped away at me over the years, about the way he had started snapping at Noah, the way I had spent years walking on eggshells, terrified of setting him off. And then I described the night I fell, how he had grabbed me, how I had lost my balance, how he hadn't even bothered to help me when I lay broken at the bottom of the stairs. Ryan's lawyer tried to shake me. "Mrs. Collins, isn't it possible you simply lost your footing? That this was an accident?" I met his gaze head-on. "No," I said, my voice steady. "It wasn't an accident." The cross-examination ended shortly after that. I had told the truth, and no amount of twisting words could change that. When the judge called for a recess, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Sophia squeezed my hand. "You did amazing," she said. I glanced over at Ryan. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at the table, his jaw tight. For the first time, he looked afraid. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath as we waited for the verdict. I sat there, my hands clasped together tightly, my heart pounding in my chest. Ryan hadn't looked at me once since I had finished my testimony. Maybe for the first time in his life, he realized he had lost control over me, that he couldn't intimidate me into silence anymore. The judge returned, and everyone stood. The moment of truth had arrived. I barely heard the legal formalities as the judge spoke, but the words that mattered hit me like a wave. Based on the evidence provided and the testimonies heard, the defendant, Ryan Collins, is found guilty of domestic assault and harassment. He is hereby sentenced to 2 years in prison and is required to pay financial compensation to the victim. The moment the gavel struck, sealing the verdict, I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. My body trembled, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming weight of relief. It was over. Ryan stood frozen, his face drained of color. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he barely reacted. The officers approached to take him into custody. That's when he finally turned to look at me, his eyes filled with something I had never seen before. Fear. Not for me, but for himself. "You'll regret this, Lily," he hissed as they led him away. But for the first time in my life, his words didn't scare me. I met his gaze, my voice steady.
No, Ryan.
"I won't." Afterward, my parents hugged me tightly, my mother crying tears of relief. Sophia patted my shoulder and said, "You did it, Lily. You got justice." I nodded, but deep inside, I knew that justice wasn't just about Ryan going to prison. It was about finally taking back my life. The first night in my new apartment felt surreal. Noah was already asleep in his bed, safe and peaceful. I sat in the living room, staring at the walls of this small, unfamiliar space, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't holding my breath, waiting for the next storm to hit. I was free. But freedom didn't mean everything was suddenly perfect. The emotional wounds still lingered. Some nights, I woke up in a panic, my heart racing as if I expected Ryan to still be there, yelling, grabbing my arm, making me feel small. But then I would hear Noah's soft breathing in the next room, and I'd remind myself he's gone. He can't hurt us anymore. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to rebuild, to find myself again. That's when I started writing. At first, it was just for me a way to process everything, to make sense of the years I had lost. But then one night, I decided to share my story. I started a blog, writing about what I had been through, about how I had found the strength to leave. I didn't expect much. I thought maybe a handful of people would read it. But within weeks, my inbox was flooded. Messages from women, some in situations just like mine, some who had escaped, some who had never spoken about their abuse before. They told me that reading my words made them feel seen, that it gave them hope. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose again. I kept writing, kept sharing. Soon, my blog turned into a community, a space where survivors could speak without fear, where they could find support and resources to escape their own nightmares. I worked with organizations that helped victims of domestic violence. I connected with lawyers, therapists, and shelters, using my platform to guide women toward the help they needed. And as my blog grew, so did my confidence. One evening, as Noah and I sat on the couch watching his favorite show, he turned to me and said, "Mom, you're smiling more now." His words caught me off guard. I hadn't even realized it. "I am?" I asked. He nodded.
Yeah.
"You used to look sad a lot, but now you look happy." Tears filled my eyes, but this time, they weren't from pain. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly. "I am happy, sweetheart," I whispered, "because we're finally safe." It took time, but I built a new life for us. I became financially independent, something Ryan had once made me believe I could never be. I made new friends, ones who knew me as Lily, the survivor, not Lily, the broken wife. I no longer lived in fear. Ryan was gone, but he no longer had power over me. I was no longer the woman he had tried to break. I was stronger,
Wiser. Free.
and I would never, ever be silent again.